The voicemail that arrived after the phone was destroyed. A voicemail notification appeared on an active account linked to a phone that no longer existed. The device had been physically destroyed days earlier and could not receive calls. In the spring of 2019, a municipal insurance investigator named Daniel Kovac reviewed a property damage claim tied to a traffic accident. Daniel was 42 years old and specialized in digital evidence verification. Part of his work involved confirming timelines when devices were reported lost or destroyed. The claim involved a single vehicle collision on a rural highway. The driver, a freelance surveyor named Evan Holt, survived with minor injuries. His phone did not. According to the accident report, the vehicle rolled after striking a barrier. The phone was ejected and crushed under the car. Photographs taken at the scene showed the device bent, shattered, and split along the frame. The battery casing was ruptured. It never powered on again. 2 days later, Evan contacted his carrier to report the phone destroyed. The IMEI was flagged. The SIM was deactivated. The account remained active only to transfer data to a replacement device. 3 days after the crash, Evan accessed his carrier's online account. He intended to retrieve saved contacts and backed up messages. While reviewing the dashboard, he noticed a new voicemail alert. The timestamp showed it had arrived the previous night. The voicemail duration was 31 seconds. It was listed as new. Evan assumed it was a system error. He attempted to play it. The audio loaded without delay. The voicemail contained ambient noise at first, wind, faint traffic, and a rhythmic metallic sound. Then, a voice spoke. It was Evan's voice. The message was short and unstructured. It did not resemble a typical voicemail greeting or message. It sounded like speech recorded unintentionally. Evan immediately ended playback. He checked the details again. The voicemail had been routed through his destroyed phone number. The receiving device did not exist. No forwarding rules were active at the time. Daniel obtained the carrier logs as part of the claim review. They confirmed the voicemail had been recorded after the IMEI deactivation. The call originated from a location several miles from the crash site. The routing path showed standard network handling. No errors were logged. The carrier confirmed the voicemail system had not generated test audio. The message was user-created. It required a live call reaching the voicemail server. Daniel requested the original audio file. Metadata showed no signs of editing or recompression. The timestamp was consistent across systems. The voicemail had been created exactly when the account showed no active device. Evan insisted he had not placed or received any calls that night. Hospital records confirmed he was home and alone. His replacement phone was still sealed in its box. The voicemail existed independently of any physical handset. It had arrived on a number that could not receive it, and it contained a voice that should not have been recorded at all. By the end of the week, Daniel classified the case as a technical anomaly. The insurance claim was approved. The voicemail remained stored on the account. No one could explain how it was created. The phone that should have captured it had already been destroyed. Daniel expanded the review beyond the insurance requirements. He requested a full call detail record from the carrier's fraud and network team. The data included routing nodes, server timestamps, and voicemail handling logs. Every system showed the same result. The call that produced the voicemail entered the network normally. It rang for several seconds, then transferred to voicemail. The voicemail server recorded the audio without interruption. No handset ever answered. The originating number was Evan's own. The system showed the call as self-originated. That detail immediately raised questions. Self-calls were technically possible only under limited conditions. They usually required misconfigured forwarding or test loops. None of those were active on Evan's account. Daniel checked whether the destroyed phone could have briefly powered on. The accident photos showed a ruptured battery and exposed circuitry. A carrier technician confirmed the device could not transmit or register. Even momentary connectivity was impossible. The SIM card had also been recovered. It was warped and cracked. No contact pads were intact. It could not have been reused or placed in another device unnoticed. Daniel next examined the location data. The voicemail routing log listed a cell sector miles from Evan's home. It was near a stretch of highway under reconstruction. That area matched the ambient noise heard in the recording. The rhythmic metallic sound aligned with construction equipment. Wind and distant traffic were consistent with an outdoor environment. The voicemail sounded like it had been recorded in open air. Daniel replayed the portion where Evan's voice appeared. It was not speaking clearly. It sounded like fragmented speech, as if mid-conversation. The phrases did not address anyone. Audio specialists reviewed the file. They found no evidence of synthesis or splicing. The voice matched Evan's vocal patterns within expected variation. It was not a copy of any known recording. Daniel asked Evan to listen again under supervision. Evan recognized his own breathing pattern and cadence. He insisted he had never been near that location after the crash. He had no memory of making any call. Carrier engineers reviewed voicemail system behavior. They confirmed the server could not invent caller audio. It only recorded what it received through a live connection. Without a transmitting device, the voicemail should not exist. One engineer suggested call spoofing. However, spoofed calls could not route audio back into the same account. The system architecture prevented self-loop recording. That path was blocked by design. Daniel documented every technical explanation and eliminated them one by one. Each required a condition that did not exist. Each failed under scrutiny. The voicemail remained a valid network artifact. It had timestamps, routing data, and storage records. It behaved exactly like a real message. The only problem was its origin. No device had been capable of sending it. No person admitted to making it. Yet the system treated it as genuine. As the investigation continued, one detail stood out. The voicemail timestamp matched the exact time Evan's car had been removed from impound. The vehicle was towed through the same highway corridor listed in the routing logs. Daniel noted the coincidence but could not connect it technically. No onboard systems in the car could place calls. No Bluetooth devices were paired at that time. By the end of the second review phase, Daniel had exhausted standard explanations. The voicemail could not be dismissed as error. It had been created in a way the system did not allow. And it was still stored, waiting to be deleted. Daniel prepared the final report with an unresolved classification. From an insurance perspective, the case was complete. From a technical standpoint, it was not. Before closing the file, Daniel requested one last verification. He asked the carrier to preserve the voicemail indefinitely. Normally, messages were purged after a retention period. This one was flagged for archival storage. Weeks later, Evan contacted Daniel again. He said the voicemail had changed. The original 31-second message was still listed. The timestamp was the same. The metadata was unchanged. But the audio was not identical. The first portion remained ambient noise, wind, traffic, and metal on metal. But the section containing Evan's voice was longer. The speech extended several seconds past where it had ended before. Evan said the new portion made him stop listening. Daniel requested the updated file directly from the carrier. It matched Evan's description. The added audio sounded closer, less distant. The voice was clearer. It was still Evan's voice. This time, the words were distinguishable. They were not a message. They sounded like someone narrating what they saw. The phrases were incomplete. Short statements separated by breathing. They described headlights, motion, and darkness. None were addressed to another person. The carrier confirmed the file had not been overwritten. Voicemail systems did not append audio to existing messages. Messages were immutable once stored. No access logs showed retrieval or modification. No duplication errors were recorded. The system insisted the file was unchanged. Daniel compared audio fingerprints from both versions. They differed. Yet the system metadata treated them as the same object. At Daniel's request, the carrier froze the account. No further voicemail access was allowed. The message remained stored but unreachable. Evan replaced his phone number shortly afterward. He did not want to receive anything else. The old number was eventually recycled. Years later, during a compliance audit, Daniel revisited the case. The archived voicemail was referenced but not accessible. The storage index showed a file size inconsistent with its original duration. There was no explanation in the audit notes. The anomaly was never resolved. No similar cases were documented. The voicemail was created after the phone was destroyed. It existed without a source, and for a brief period, it did not stay the same. Whatever recorded it did not need the phone. Whatever spoke used Evan's voice, and whatever sent it was never identified. The security tape shows a figure that never exited. Security footage captured a person entering a restricted corridor late at night. No camera ever recorded that person leaving the building. In the fall of 2014, a contract security supervisor named Halvor Tusk reviewed overnight footage at a municipal utilities building. He was 50 years old and had spent most of his career guarding industrial and infrastructure sites. The building housed electrical control systems, storage rooms, and retired equipment. After business hours, it was required to remain completely empty. Halvor's review that morning was routine. A motion alert had triggered shortly after midnight in the lower service corridor. That corridor was rarely used and connected only storage areas and sealed access points. There were no offices, restrooms, or public exits beyond it. At 12:37 a.m., the footage showed a single figure entering the corridor. The person appeared adult and average height, dressed in dark clothing. The face was indistinct due to camera angle and low contrast. The figure walked calmly and did not hesitate or look around. Halvor expected the person to reach the end of the corridor and turn back. Instead, the figure continued forward until passing out of the camera's view. The camera did not cover the final section near a sealed maintenance door. That blind spot measured less than 10 feet. Halvor immediately pulled the next camera feed. There was no footage of the figure emerging. The sealed door camera showed no activity at all. The door sensor never registered an opening or vibration. He rewound the recording and played it again at slower speed. The figure entered once and moved steadily forward. There was no pause, stumble, or change in posture. Then, the corridor was empty. Halvor checked system diagnostics for recording gaps. The timestamp sequence was continuous and intact. There were no drop frames or corrupted segments. The footage was complete. Assuming a camera malfunction, Halvor reviewed footage from earlier and later that night. The corridor remained empty for hours before the alert. It stayed empty for the rest of the shift. No additional motion alerts were triggered. He flagged the clip for follow-up and notified building management. Maintenance staff confirmed no one was scheduled overnight. The sealed door at the end of the corridor had not been opened in years. It was welded shut after older equipment was removed. Later that morning, Halvor walked the corridor himself. It was narrow, clean, and well lit. There were no alcoves, ceiling hatches, or hidden access panels. The walls showed no recent disturbance. The sealed door sat flush with the concrete wall. There was no handle and no visible seam wide enough to force open. Beyond it was solid fill where a room once existed. There was nowhere for a person to go. Halvor returned to the footage and watched it again. The figure moved naturally and cast a normal shadow. Nothing about the movement suggested a trick of light. It looked like a real person entering a real space. By the end of the review, Halvor had one unresolved fact. Someone walked into a corridor that had no exit. Every system confirmed the building stayed sealed. The recording showed an entry that had no ending. Building management requested a full internal review once Halvor submitted the clip. Security logs, access records, and maintenance schedules were pulled the same day. Every system showed the building was officially unoccupied overnight. No staff, vendors, or contractors were authorized inside. Badge access logs showed no entries near the time of the motion alert. No credentials were used on any door within the lower corridor zone. Alarm sensors remained armed and untriggered. The system timeline showed no anomalies beyond the video itself. Maintenance staff confirmed the sealed door history. Years earlier, the corridor extended farther into an older control room. That room had been decommissioned and demolished during a modernization project. The remaining passage was cut short and sealed permanently. Halver requested archival building plans for clarity. Blueprints showed the corridor once continued another 20 feet. The old control room had no exterior exits. Anyone entering it would have needed to walk back the same way. That return never appeared on camera. The footage showed only the initial entry. There was no second motion alert, no shadow, no partial movement. The corridor remained empty for the rest of the night. Security performed a detailed physical sweep. Ceiling tiles were checked for displacement or gaps. Wall panels were inspected for removable sections. Floor surfaces showed no scuff marks or disturbances. The sealed door was examined closely. It was welded along the frame and reinforced internally. There was no space behind it large enough to conceal a person. Thermal scans showed uniform temperature across the wall. Halver sent the footage to an external security analyst. The analyst reviewed metadata, compression patterns, and lighting consistency. They found no signs of editing, overlay, or frame insertion. The recording was confirmed authentic. The analyst noted that the figure moved naturally. Stride length, posture, and arm swing matched a normal walking pace. Lighting interaction was correct for the corridor fixtures. Nothing suggested a projection or reflection. Investigators considered timing errors. They checked system clocks against network time servers. All timestamps aligned correctly across devices. The moment of disappearance could not be explained by desynchronization. Management asked whether the figure could have exited before reaching the blind spot. Halver replayed the footage frame by frame. The person never turned or slowed. They continued forward until leaving the camera view. No sound accompanied the event. There were no footsteps recorded beyond expected ambient noise. The corridor microphone captured nothing unusual. Silence followed the entry. Over the next several weeks, Halver monitored the corridor closely. Additional cameras were temporarily installed. Motion sensitivity was adjusted and tested. Nothing similar occurred again. The corridor remained empty every night. No figures appeared and no alerts triggered. The sealed door never registered activity. The building behaved normally. Despite that, the original clip resisted explanation. Every theory required a missing step that never appeared. Someone entered a controlled space. No system recorded them leaving. By the end of the review, management classified the incident as unresolved. The footage was archived with restricted access. Halver retained a copy for internal training. It remained the only example of its kind. Months after the review closed, the archived footage was revisited during a facilities audit. An engineer requested older renovation records tied to the sealed corridor. Those records dated back more than a decade and included demolition notes. They showed when the old control room was removed and the passage closed. Photographs taken during demolition revealed something management had forgotten. Before sealing, the corridor wall had been extended several feet farther than planned. The change was made quickly to meet inspection deadlines. It shortened the visible hallway, but left a narrow void behind the new wall. That void was not large enough to function as a room. It was an empty cavity filled with insulation and conduit. There was no access point and no lighting. It was never listed as occupiable space. Engineers confirmed the cavity could not hold a standing adult. Even crouched, there was not enough depth. Nothing in the construction explained how someone could enter it. The finding removed one of the last practical theories. The external analyst reviewed the footage again after learning this. He confirmed the figure never slowed near the blind spot. There was no indication of turning or ducking. The stride remained consistent until the moment the person vanished from view. Halver watched the tape alongside the analyst. Both agreed the disappearance occurred exactly where the camera coverage ended. The figure crossed from recorded space into unrecorded space. What happened next was unknown, not captured, and not inferred. Management decided the case would not be reopened. No safety risk could be demonstrated. No repeat incidents occurred. From an operational standpoint, the building was secure. The corridor was left unchanged. The sealed door remained welded. The camera angle stayed the same. Nothing was added to cover the blind spot. Years later, Halver retired from contract security. He trained his replacement using routine examples. The corridor footage was shown only once, without commentary. It was labeled as an unresolved anomaly. The building continues to operate. Employees pass above the corridor daily without noticing it. No one enters the sealed section. No one exits it either. The tape still exists in the archive. It shows a person entering a space that should not allow passage. It shows normal movement and normal lighting. It simply stops showing the person. Every system agrees on one fact. The figure was real. The entry happened. The exit did not. This abandoned cabin logged movement every night. Motion logs from a remote monitoring system showed consistent activity inside an abandoned cabin. No caretaker, ranger, or visitor was recorded entering the structure during that period. In the early fall of 2018, a forestry monitoring technician named Kellen Arvik reviewed sensor data from protected land parcels. He was 38 years old and worked for a regional conservation authority. Part of his job involved overseeing remote structures scheduled for demolition or preservation. The cabin was one of several flagged for observation. The structure sat deep within a managed forest zone. It had once been used as a seasonal ranger outpost decades earlier. After budget cuts and route changes, it was abandoned and sealed. No utilities remained connected, and access was restricted. The monitoring system had been installed the previous year. It consisted of battery-powered motion sensors and a basic data logger. The purpose was to detect illegal entry or wildlife intrusion. Data transmitted once per day when signal conditions allowed. Kellen first noticed the pattern during a routine weekly review. Every night, between 12:40 and 1:10 a.m., the cabin logged motion. The activation duration varied slightly, but occurred without exception. Daytime logs showed nothing at all. At first, Kellen assumed wildlife. Small mammals frequently triggered similar sensors. However, the cabin's entry points were boarded and reinforced. Ground-level gaps were sealed, and elevated areas were inaccessible. He checked sensor placement diagrams. The primary sensor faced the interior center of the main room. It was mounted at chest height, angled downward. It should not have been sensitive to rodents or ground movement. Kellen pulled raw data from the logger. The motion signature showed smooth onset and decay. It resembled a body moving through space rather than a brief disturbance. The pattern repeated each night with minor variation. He compared the data to other abandoned sites. None showed consistent nightly activation. Most logged occasional random triggers or none at all. Only the cabin produced activity every night. Kellen flagged the anomaly and requested a site check. Due to distance and terrain, the visit was scheduled a week later. Until then, he continued monitoring the logs closely. The pattern continued without interruption. Each activation began within the same 30-minute window. The sensor stayed active for several seconds, then went idle. There were no secondary triggers afterward. It looked like a single presence, moving once, then stopping. Weather data was reviewed next. Wind conditions were light during several logged nights. Temperature shifts were gradual and unremarkable. Nothing explained the consistency. Kellen checked the battery status and signal integrity. Both were within normal operating range. There were no power resets or data corruption events. The system appeared healthy. He reviewed the cabin's access history. No permits had been issued for entry. No maintenance crews were scheduled. The nearest trailhead was over 5 miles away. By the time the site visit date approached, Kellen felt uneasy. The data did not behave like noise. It behaved like routine. Something inside the cabin was moving every night. The logs never identified what caused the motion. They only recorded that it happened, and it happened again the night before the visit. The site visit took place 7 days after Kellen first flagged the anomaly. He drove as far as the service road allowed, then continued on foot. The trail was narrow and unused, marked only by faded boundary signs. Nothing suggested recent traffic or routine visits. The cabin came into view through dense trees shortly before dusk. It sat on a slight rise, weathered and gray, with boards covering every window. The front door was reinforced with a steel plate and heavy bolts. Kellen stopped several yards away and listened. The forest was quiet, except for distant insects. There were no voices, no movement, and no signs of habitation. He circled the structure slowly, checking the perimeter for disturbance. The ground showed no fresh footprints or broken brush. Kellen unlocked the maintenance seal and entered with a handheld light. The interior smelled dry and stale, unchanged by recent presence. Dust covered the floor evenly, with no tracks crossing the room. Furniture had been removed years earlier. The motion sensor was mounted exactly where records indicated. It faced the center of the room and showed no damage. The indicator light blinked normally. Battery levels matched the remote data. Kellen checked for drafts or loose boards. The walls were solid and the ceiling intact. No animals could have entered unnoticed. There were no nests, droppings, or fur. He placed a secondary portable sensor near the first. It was calibrated to a lower sensitivity setting. If wildlife or vibration caused the trigger, the pattern would change. He activated both devices and exited the cabin. That night, Kellen camped at a nearby monitoring post. He checked the data manually at intervals. At 12:52 a.m., both sensors logged motion. The timestamps matched within seconds. The duration was nearly identical to previous nights. The signal curve showed gradual movement across the room. Then it stopped. No further activity followed. At first light, Kellen re-entered the cabin. The interior was unchanged. Dust patterns remained intact. Nothing had shifted or fallen. He reviewed the data on site. Both sensors showed the same movement signature. The portable unit ruled out a faulty primary device. Something inside had triggered both. Kellen expanded the investigation. Additional sensors were placed over the next 2 nights. Each was positioned to cover a different angle. All of them logged movement during the same nightly window. None recorded activity at other times. The pattern did not drift or weaken. It repeated with unsettling precision. The cabin behaved like it was occupied briefly each night. Kellen reported the findings to his supervisor. The response was cautious and procedural. He was instructed to rule out environmental causes completely. No one suggested a human explanation. Thermal data from nearby stations was reviewed. Temperature changes were minimal during trigger times. Wind speeds were low and inconsistent. No seismic activity was recorded. On the 4th night, Kellen added a time-stamped camera trap. It faced the interior from a corner angle. The shutter activated with motion and infrared light. The system was tested before deployment. At 1 a.m., the sensors triggered again. The camera logged an activation. When Kellen checked the image later, it showed an empty room. No blur, no shadow, and no obstruction appeared. The sensors recorded movement. The camera recorded nothing. That contradiction deepened the concern. After a week, the pattern remained unchanged. Motion logs accumulated with identical timing. The cabin itself showed no trace of use. Every system agreed something moved inside. Kellen recommended discontinuing monitoring. The data no longer served its original purpose. Instead, it raised questions without answers. Management delayed the decision. The cabin continued logging movement each night. Nothing new appeared in the room. Nothing ever appeared on camera. The logs kept their schedule without explanation. After 3 weeks of continuous logging, management approved a change in procedure. The cabin would no longer be actively monitored. The sensors would remain in place, but no alerts would be reviewed in real time. From an administrative standpoint, the site posed no safety risk. Kellen completed the final documentation himself. He compiled motion graphs, timestamps, environmental data, and camera images. Every entry showed the same pattern: nightly movement with no visible source. Before leaving the site for the last time, Kellen performed one final walkthrough. The cabin remained unchanged. Dust still covered the floor evenly. The air inside was cold and still. He powered down the portable equipment and sealed the door. The primary sensor was left running until its battery expired months later. Data continued to transmit during that period. The nightly activations never stopped. When the battery finally failed, the logs ended abruptly. There was no final anomaly. The system simply went silent. No further investigation followed. Years later, during a regional data migration, archived logs were reviewed. The cabin's dataset stood out immediately. It was the only site with uninterrupted nightly movement for its entire monitored life. No explanation had ever been recorded. An engineer cross-referenced the timestamps with historical records. The activation window matched the hours the cabin had once been staffed. Decades earlier, rangers rotated overnight shifts during fire season. The logs matched those shift hours almost exactly. The correlation was noted but not pursued. No one suggested a cause. It was filed as coincidence. The record remained incomplete. The cabin was eventually scheduled for removal. Before demolition, a final inspection confirmed it was empty. Nothing was found inside. No remains, no objects, no signs of use. When the structure was taken down, the ground beneath showed no unusual markings. Soil compaction was normal. There was no evidence of repeated movement. After demolition, monitoring equipment in the area logged nothing. The forest returned to baseline conditions. No nightly activations occurred. Kellen was informed of the demolition months later. He reviewed the final report. The cabin had been removed cleanly and without incident. The logs remain archived in the system. They show movement that followed a routine. They do not show what caused it. For years, something moved through that cabin every night. It did so without leaving a trace. When the cabin disappeared, the movement did too. The system recorded exactly what it was designed to record: presence. It never recorded who or what was there. The night guard heard footsteps, then saw the logbook. Security audio from the north wing captured footsteps after midnight. Later, the logbook showed an entry written when the building was supposed to be empty. In the spring of 2017, a night guard named Darlen Voigt reported for duty at a municipal archives facility. He was 46 years old and worked contract security after leaving a long career in warehouse supervision. The building stored decades of permits, property records, and sealed civil evidence in long concrete corridors. Darlen's goal every night was routine: complete patrols on schedule and document everything carefully. The facility closed to staff at 6 p.m. and reopened the following morning. After hours, Darlen was the only authorized person inside the building. Motion sensors covered stairwells and main hallways, but several storage wings required physical patrols. Those areas were quiet and dim, lit only by emergency fixtures mounted high on the walls. Just after 1 a.m., Darlen began his second patrol of the shift. He moved through the north wing, checking door seals and emergency lighting. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint smell of paper and dust. His footsteps echoed softly as he walked, familiar and predictable. Halfway down the records corridor, Darlen heard footsteps behind him. They were slow, measured, and clearly distinct from his own. He stopped immediately and turned around. The corridor behind him was empty. The sound stopped the moment he stopped. Darlen waited several seconds, listening closely. Nothing followed, not even an echo. He told himself it was sound reflection and continued forward. 10 steps later, the footsteps returned. This time, they were closer and matched his pace exactly. When he slowed, they slowed. When he stopped, they stopped again. Darlen felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with exertion. He turned once more and scanned the corridor. There were no side doors open and no movement at either end. The emergency lights hummed quietly overhead. He keyed his radio and announced his location. Dispatch did not respond, which occasionally happened due to poor reception inside the building. He checked the nearest alarm panel, which showed no motion alerts. Everything appeared normal. Darlen completed the patrol without further noise and returned to the security desk. As required, he opened the paper logbook and recorded the patrol time. He noted hearing unexplained footsteps and attributed them to acoustics. He signed his name and closed the book. The hours passed quietly until just after 3 a.m. Darlen was seated at the desk reviewing paperwork when he heard the footsteps again. This time they came from the stairwell near the north wing. They sounded heavier, like boots striking concrete. He stood and listened. The footsteps moved across the floor above him, slow and deliberate. They lasted nearly a full minute before fading away. No alarms sounded and no sensors activated. Darlin checked the camera feed covering the stairwell. The screen showed an empty landing. No doors opened and no shadows passed. The system logs showed no recorded motion. He returned to the desk and opened the logbook again. Carefully, he wrote the time and location of the sound. He described the footsteps and noted their duration. He initialed the entry and left the book open briefly to dry the ink. By the end of the shift, nothing else occurred. Darlin locked up, completed his final report, and left the building at sunrise. He expected the night to be remembered only as an odd shift. He did not know the logbook would become the real problem. The next evening, Darlin returned for his shift, expecting questions but not confrontation. Before he could clock in, the day's supervisor asked him to step into her office. She was holding the logbook open on the desk, turned to the previous night. She asked why he had conducted an unscheduled patrol at 2:37 a.m. Darlin told her he had not left the desk at that time. He explained that he had been completing paperwork and monitoring cameras. The supervisor pointed to the page and asked him to read the entry aloud. Between his two entries was another patrol note written in his handwriting. It listed the north wing stairwell and mentioned footsteps heard with no visual contact. The wording used his usual abbreviations and spacing. It ended with the same closing phrase he always used. Darlin said clearly that he did not write it. He recognized the handwriting but could not remember making the entry. The supervisor asked if he could have forgotten due to fatigue. Darlin answered that he had been alert and seated at the desk then. Management initiated an internal review that same morning. Security footage from the desk camera was pulled for the exact time listed. The video showed Darlin seated, writing unrelated notes, and never leaving his chair. The timestamp matched the mysterious logbook entry precisely. They checked the stairwell camera next. It showed an empty concrete landing with no movement. No doors opened, and no lights changed. The motion sensor log showed no activity during that period. Darlin was asked to walk through his actions minute by minute. His account matched the video footage without gaps. There was no time window where he could have written the entry unnoticed. The logbook itself had never left the desk. The review expanded to archived security records. Older paper logbooks were pulled from storage. 2 previous guards had documented unexplained footsteps in the same north wing. In both cases, additional entries appeared between confirmed patrol times. One guard had written that he assumed he was overtired. The other noted confusion but never filed a formal complaint. Both men eventually left the position within months. No further action had been taken at the time. A handwriting specialist was consulted to examine the disputed entries. The analysis showed strong similarity to each guard's writing style. However, small inconsistencies appeared in pressure and letter alignment. It looked practiced but not fully natural. The specialist concluded the writing was not forged by another person. It also could not be confidently attributed to the guards themselves. The report used the phrase deliberate imitation without identified author. That conclusion unsettled everyone involved. Management considered mechanical explanations. They inspected ventilation systems for vibration that might move pages. They tested pens and ink flow under various conditions. None of the tests explained how a complete entry could appear. As a precaution, Darlin was reassigned to desk-only duties. Another guard was brought in to cover patrols temporarily. Both men reported hearing no further footsteps during that period. The building remained quiet. Despite that, the unexplained entry remained in the logbook. It could not be removed or disregarded. It was a written record of an action that no one could place. That made it a liability. Management scheduled a meeting to decide next steps. The decision would permanently change how the facility documented its nights. Management decided to eliminate the paper logbook entirely. Within a week, a digital logging system was installed at the security desk. Entries now required a personal login and automatic timestamps. Patrol confirmations were tied directly to motion sensors and cameras. The old logbooks were boxed and sealed for records retention. They were labeled and moved to an off-site storage facility. No pages were removed and no annotations were added. The unexplained entry remained exactly where it had been written. Darlin completed his remaining shifts without incident. He never heard footsteps again after patrol duties were reassigned. Still, he avoided the North Wing whenever possible. The memory of the handwriting stayed with him. Several months later, an external audit reviewed archived security materials. The auditors flagged the sealed logbooks as irregular. They requested permission to review them for completeness. Management allowed access under supervision. During the review, one auditor noticed a pattern. Each unexplained entry appeared shortly after a guard reported hearing footsteps. The timing varied, but the sequence stayed consistent. Sound first, writing second. The auditors compared the language used in the entries. Each one mirrored the vocabulary and phrasing of the assigned guard. However, none included personal remarks or emotional notes. They read like routine observations stripped of context. One theory suggested unconscious writing during brief dissociative episodes. Another suggested deliberate hoaxing by an unknown party. Neither explanation fit all recorded facts. No one could explain how entries appeared while guards were on camera. After the audit, the logbooks were returned to storage. They were marked as reviewed and closed. No recommendation was made to destroy them. They remained part of the facility record. Years later, the archives facility underwent renovation. The North Wing stairwell was reconfigured and sealed. Motion sensors were upgraded and coverage expanded. Security reports from that point forward were uneventful. Ballen eventually left contract security and took a daytime job. He avoided discussing his time at the archives. When asked, he described it as quiet but unsettling. He never claimed to know what caused the entries. The sealed logbooks are still stored with other administrative records. They are rarely requested and almost never read. The unexplained writing remains preserved. It documents patrols that officially never happened. A dispatcher logged a call from a line marked dead. Call logs showed an incoming emergency call from a phone line officially disconnected years earlier. The system flagged the line as inactive, yet protocol required the dispatcher to answer anyway. In the summer of 2016, a county dispatcher named Relin Hodge worked the overnight shift at a regional emergency center. He was 41 years old and had spent more than a decade answering medical and police calls. The center covered several rural towns where nights were usually quiet and predictable. Relin's goal each shift was consistency. Answer fast, log carefully, and move on. The building was windowless and softly lit, with rows of consoles facing a large digital wall. Each station displayed incoming calls, unit status, and location data. Older infrastructure still supported landlines in remote areas. Those lines occasionally produced routing errors, but rarely anything serious. At 2:48 a.m., a new call appeared on Relin's screen. The caller ID field populated with a landline number highlighted in red. Next to it, the system displayed a status marker reading inactive. That marker meant the line had been disconnected and should not function. Ballen assumed the system had misread the status. He had seen outdated records cause similar alerts before. Without hesitation, he accepted the call. The line opened cleanly, without static or distortion. A man's voice came through immediately. It was calm and controlled, not rushed or panicked. He said there had been an accident and someone was badly hurt. Ballen asked for the location. The caller gave an address that matched the inactive number. Ballen paused and checked the database again. The address belonged to a farmhouse condemned years earlier after a fire. Records showed the structure no longer existed. Ballen asked the caller to confirm where he was calling from. The man repeated the same address, then said help needed to come quickly. There was no background noise on the line. No wind, traffic, or other voices could be heard. Following protocol, Ballen asked for nearby landmarks. The caller described a gravel drive, a mailbox, and a wide-open field. Those details matched archived property photos taken before the fire. Ballen felt uneasy but continued the call. He entered the information into the system and dispatched a patrol unit for a welfare check. The call was flagged automatically due to the inactive line status. Before Ballen could ask another question, the caller stopped speaking. The line disconnected cleanly, without warning. Ballen sat back and stared at the screen for several seconds. The call duration showed just under 1 minute. Everything about the interaction sounded normal. Only the source of the call did not make sense. He documented the incident carefully. He noted the inactive line alert and attached the call recording. The system accepted the file without error. From a technical standpoint, the call existed like any other. Minutes later, the patrol unit radioed back. The location was empty, just debris and an overgrown field. There were no vehicles, lights, or people. The unit cleared the call as unfounded. Ballen acknowledged the update and closed the incident. Still, he replayed the call once through his headset. The voice sounded steady and deliberate. It did not sound confused or mistaken. As the night returned to silence, Ballen tried to focus on routine tasks. Yet the red inactive marker lingered in his mind. The line had been marked dead for years. It should never have rung at all. Later that morning, Ballen briefed his supervisor before ending the shift. She reviewed the incident log and focused on the inactive line indicator. The number had been disconnected for more than 5 years. There was no record of temporary reactivation or maintenance testing. She instructed Ballen to flag the call for technical review. Before leaving, he added a short note describing the calm tone of the caller. That detail felt important to him, though he could not explain why. He went home expecting the issue to be resolved quietly. The following night, Ballen returned for another overnight shift. The room felt quieter than usual, with fewer calls than expected. Shortly after 2:45 a.m., his screen refreshed. The same number appeared again, highlighted in red and marked inactive. The timestamp read 2:46 a.m., almost the same minute as the night before. Ballen accepted the call immediately and adjusted his headset. The line opened cleanly again. The same voice spoke. It sounded unchanged in tone and pace. The caller said the situation had gotten worse. Ballen asked who he was speaking with. There was a pause before the answer came. The man said the name did not matter. His breathing was audible but steady. There were still no background sounds. Ballen asked how the caller was making the call. The question was ignored. Instead, the caller described hearing sirens in the distance. Ballen listened closely and heard nothing like that. Ballen told the caller units had been sent the night before. The man responded by saying no one arrived. His voice remained calm, without accusation or anger. That calmness unsettled Ballen more than panic would have. Before Ballen could ask another question, the caller spoke again. He said help was running out. Then the line disconnected abruptly. The call lasted less than 1 minute. Ballen documented the second call immediately. He flagged it as a repeat anomaly and alerted his supervisor. She came to a station and listened to both recordings back to back. The voices matched perfectly. Supervisors contacted the phone service provider while Ballen was still on duty. Routing data showed both calls originated from the same physical line. There was no evidence of call forwarding or number spoofing. The infrastructure should not have allowed the connection. A patrol unit was dispatched again, despite low expectations. The unit confirmed the same result as before. The address led to an empty field with no recent activity. There were no footprints, tire marks, or lights. Technical staff examined the call center equipment. No faults were found in Ballen's console. Other dispatchers had not received similar calls. The anomaly appeared isolated to that single number. Archived dispatch records were searched that same night. The number was linked to one prior emergency call years earlier. A man at that address had reported a medical crisis. Severe weather delayed responders significantly. Records showed the caller died before help arrived. The incident was closed without review. The number was disconnected shortly afterward. Ballen read the report in silence. After the second call, the line never rang again. No further attempts were recorded. The system continued to mark the number inactive. There were no additional anomalies. Ballen finished the shift without speaking much. He saved copies of the recordings as required. The voices sounded ordinary and clear. That normality made the calls harder to forget. By sunrise, the call center returned to routine. Phones rang from valid numbers only. Yet Ballen knew something had broken procedure. A deadline had called twice, then gone quiet. Supervisors compiled a full report after the second call and forwarded it to county administration. The case was categorized as a verified call from an inactive line. That classification was rare but not impossible on paper. In practice, no one at the center had ever seen it happen twice. A technical audit was ordered within the week. Phone routing equipment was inspected line by line. Historical service records were reviewed back to the original disconnection. There was no evidence of temporary restoration or manual override. Engineers confirmed the physical line no longer existed. Copper wiring to the property had been removed years earlier. There was nothing left to carry a signal. From a technical standpoint, the calls should have been impossible. The archived report from the earlier medical emergency was reviewed more closely. The caller had described severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. He had stayed on the line until responders were delayed by flooding. The recording ended when the caller stopped responding. Ballen listened to that older recording once. The voice matched the recent calls. The tone, cadence, and breathing patterns were the same. He did not need analysis software to recognize it. The conclusion was never written into the official report. Instead, the file was closed with no further action recommended. The recordings were stored alongside routine dispatch calls. They were marked for training reference only. Over time, the incident became an internal anecdote. New dispatchers sometimes heard about it during quiet shifts. Most assumed it was a system error exaggerated by repetition. Ballen never corrected them. He continued working overnight for several more years. No other inactive line ever rang his console. Every call after that followed expected rules. Still, he watched the caller ID field more closely than before. Eventually, Ballen transferred to a daytime administrative role. He no longer answered emergency calls directly. The overnight center moved on without him. The case faded from daily conversation. The recordings remain stored in the system archive. They are clear, properly logged, and technically valid. They sound like any other emergency call. The only difference is the number they came from. That line is still marked inactive. It has never rung again. There is no explanation recorded for why it rang twice. The system treats it as closed, even now. This highway camera captured someone no one reported. Traffic footage from a rural highway showed a person standing on the shoulder. No police report, emergency call, or roadside stop ever matched the appearance. In early winter of 2019, a transportation technician named Calvin Rote reviewed overnight footage at a regional traffic office. He was 39 years old and handled automated alerts from highway cameras across several rural districts. The work was repetitive and quiet, focused on stalled vehicles, debris, or wildlife near traffic lanes. Calvin's goal that morning was simple: clear flagged clips before the day shift arrived. One camera sat along a divided highway between two small towns. The road curved gently through trees and low embankments with no pedestrian access points nearby. There were no rest stops, bus pullouts, or service roads connected to that stretch. Vehicles traveled fast through the area and rarely slowed. At 2:14 a.m., the system flagged motion near the right shoulder. Calvin opened the clip, expecting an animal crossing the frame. Instead, the image showed a person standing near the guardrail. The figure was upright and still, briefly illuminated by passing headlights. Calvin replayed the clip several times to confirm what he was seeing. The person did not wave, step forward, or signal for help. They stood facing the roadway with arms at their sides. No vehicle slowed or pulled over during the clip. The footage lasted 37 seconds. Throughout that time, the person did not move. Then, without visible transition, the shoulder was empty. There was no step away from the road and no motion toward the trees. Calvin checked the timestamp and frame integrity. There were no dropped frames or system errors. Weather conditions were clear, with no fog or precipitation. Visibility was normal for that hour. He immediately pulled footage from the adjacent cameras. None showed a person approaching or leaving the location. The surrounding highway remained empty except for passing traffic. The appearance existed only on that single camera. Protocol required cross-checking with incident reports. Calvin searched state police logs and emergency call records. There were no reports from that highway segment during the time window. No tow requests or maintenance dispatches were listed either. Calvin escalated the clip to his supervisor, Aurelia Noon. She reviewed the footage independently without commentary. After several minutes, she confirmed the same concerns. Someone appeared on camera without any documented reason to be there. Aurelia instructed Calvin to pull extended footage from earlier that night. The shoulder remained empty for hours before the appearance. Traffic patterns were consistent with no sudden changes. Nothing suggested a person entering the area unseen. They reviewed the clip frame by frame. The figure appeared adult and average height. Clothing looked like a light jacket and dark pants. There was no reflective material visible on the clothing. One detail stood out to both of them. The figure cast a shadow consistent with passing headlights. The shadow shifted naturally as vehicles moved through the curve. That ruled out simple glare or reflection. Aurelia contacted Highway Patrol for confirmation. An officer checked unit logs and confirmed no stops in that sector. No patrol cars passed through at that time. There was no scheduled road work or inspection planned. Calvin documented the incident and labeled it unresolved. The clip was archived according to standard procedure. Before moving on, he watched it one more time. The person remained motionless until they were suddenly gone. At the end of his shift, Calvin left the office unsettled. He had followed procedure and found no explanation. The camera had captured someone who officially was never there. That fact stayed with him longer than he expected. Later that same morning, Calvin returned to the footage with a fresh review checklist. Unresolved appearances required deeper technical verification before long-term archiving. He began by confirming camera maintenance records and system health reports. Everything showed normal operation with no recent faults. Calvin verified the camera model and its recording settings. The unit used continuous capture with motion-based flagging. Compression levels were standard and unchanged for months. There was no indication of overlay or software interpolation. Next, he examined weather data again for that location. Temperatures were near freezing with light wind. There was no fog, snow, or mist that could distort the image. Visibility matched the clarity shown in the video. He contacted the maintenance department to ask about crew activity. No vehicles or workers were scheduled overnight in that zone. The nearest crew base was over 30 miles away. No one had reason to be standing on the shoulder. Calvin then cross-checked emergency dispatch logs more thoroughly. He expanded the search window to include the hour before and after the clip. Still, there were no calls from drivers reporting a pedestrian. No near-miss reports were filed later that day either. Aurelia asked for the footage to be enhanced by the regional analysis team. Brightness and contrast were adjusted carefully without altering structure. The figure became slightly clearer but still lacked identifying features. The face remained indistinct due to angle and lighting. Analysts confirmed the figure occupied three-dimensional space. Passing headlights illuminated the person from different angles. Shadows and highlights shifted naturally with traffic flow. There were no artifacts suggesting digital manipulation. One analyst noted the stance of the figure. Weight appeared evenly distributed, feet planted parallel. It was a posture associated with waiting rather than walking. That observation raised more questions than it answered. Calvin visited the physical location later that week. He stood on the shoulder where the figure had appeared. The ground was uneven, gravel sloping toward the trees. Reaching the spot on foot would require crossing difficult terrain. He checked for any nearby footpaths or access points. There were none within visible distance. The nearest access road was over a mile away. Walking there in freezing conditions would have been risky. Calvin spoke with a highway patrol officer who regularly covered the route. The officer said he had never seen pedestrians in that area. Drivers occasionally reported animals, but never people. The clip surprised him. As part of protocol, missing person bulletins were reviewed. No cases matched the time frame or general description. No unidentified person reports surfaced afterward. The appearance remained isolated. The investigation concluded with no actionable findings. The clip stayed flagged but unresolved. Calvin returned to his regular workload. Still, the image lingered in his mind. Each time he reviewed new footage from that camera, he paid closer attention. Nothing unusual appeared again. The highway remained empty at night. The person never returned. Several months later, Calvin was assigned to help train a new technician on overnight review procedures. As part of the session, he pulled a set of archived clips labeled Unresolved for demonstration purposes. The highway footage appeared on the list because it met every technical standard. Calvin played it without comment and watched the trainee study the screen. After a moment, the trainee paused the clip and leaned closer. He pointed to the passing cars and asked to replay one frame by frame. Calvin assumed the question would be about lighting or shadow angles. Instead, the trainee focused on a brief reflection in a car window. When a sedan passed through the curve, its side window reflected the guardrail. Within that reflection, a second shape appeared for less than a second. The shape aligned with where the standing figure should have been. It did not resemble glare or interior reflection. They advanced the footage, frame by frame. The reflected shape appeared only when the person stood on the shoulder. When the shoulder was empty, the reflection disappeared completely. The timing matched perfectly. Calvin sent the finding to Aurelia and the regional analysis team. They confirmed the reflection followed physical lighting rules. It shifted slightly as the vehicle moved through the curve. That suggested it reflected something actually present beside the road. The discovery ruled out a simple recording error. It also ruled out a single camera malfunction. At least two visual sources had captured the same presence. Neither could explain where it came from or where it went. Highway Patrol reviewed the clip again after the update. No new reports surfaced from drivers. No delayed calls or tips were logged. No dash camera footage ever emerged. The incident was reclassified from technical anomaly to unexplained appearance. It remained archived under training materials with restricted notes. No public report was issued. There was no safety advisory to release. Over time, Calvin noticed a pattern in his own reaction. The longer he looked at the clip, the more ordinary the figure seemed. It did not behave erratically or threaten traffic. It simply stood there, as if waiting. Years passed, and the highway was resurfaced. The camera was upgraded, and its angle adjusted slightly. Footage from that location never showed another person at night. The clip from 2019 remained the only one. Calvin eventually moved to a different department. He stopped reviewing overnight footage regularly. Still, he remembered the case clearly. It bothered him because nothing about it was dramatic. The camera did exactly what it was designed to do. It recorded what passed in front of it. The problem was not what it captured. The problem was that no one else ever noticed the person at all. This church basement recorded sounds during prayer hours. Audio recordings captured movement and low voices in a church basement during scheduled prayer hours. The recordings continued even when the building was empty and locked. In the early spring of 2017, a facilities coordinator named Nathan Cole oversaw maintenance upgrades at a century-old stone church in a Midwestern town. Nathan was 45 years old and had worked with historic buildings for most of his career. Part of his responsibility involved installing environmental monitors to protect aging structures from moisture and structural stress. The church had a full basement beneath the sanctuary. It was unfinished, used mostly for storage, utility access, and old furniture. No services or gatherings were held there. Outside of inspections, it remained empty. As part of the upgrade, Nathan approved the installation of passive audio sensors. They were designed to detect leaks, pipe stress, and unauthorized entry. The system recorded short audio clips when sound crossed a certain threshold. All data was timestamped and archived automatically. For the first several weeks, the system logged nothing unusual. Occasional mechanical sounds appeared during daytime maintenance. At night, the basement remained silent. The pattern changed in mid-April. Nathan noticed repeated audio activations occurring in the evening. The timestamps aligned closely with scheduled prayer hours in the sanctuary above. Weeknight prayer meetings began at 7 p.m. and ended shortly after 8. The basement logs showed sound starting minutes after prayer began. The recordings lasted anywhere from 30 seconds to several minutes. Then they stopped. No additional sound was recorded for the rest of the night. Nathan assumed the system was picking up vibrations from upstairs. However, the sanctuary floor was reinforced concrete. Sound transmission tests conducted during installation showed minimal bleed-through. The basement sensors were calibrated to ignore muffled vibration. Nathan listened to the first few clips. They did not sound mechanical. There was no hum of pipes or vibration of beams. Instead, the recordings contained low, irregular noise. In several clips, it sounded like footsteps, slow and uneven, not rhythmic like walking on stairs. In others, there was something closer to breathing, a soft, repeating sound that rose and fell. Nathan checked the security logs. No motion sensors were triggered in the basement. The access doors remained locked during services. No one was authorized to enter the space. He compared the audio timestamps to the prayer schedule. Every activation occurred during prayer hours. Sunday mornings, weeknight evenings, special holiday services. When the church held no prayer, the basement was silent. No recordings appeared during concerts, rehearsals, or cleaning. Only prayer produced sound. Nathan shared the findings with the church administrator. At first, the explanation was simple. Old buildings made noise. Prayer gatherings were quiet enough for subtle sounds to register. To test this, Nathan manually triggered audio recording during empty hours. He walked the sanctuary, spoke aloud, and moved furniture. The basement sensors remained inactive. He then stood alone in the sanctuary during non-prayer hours. He spoke softly. Nothing recorded. The following week, during a midweek prayer service, the basement logged sound again. Nathan was standing in the control room at the time. He knew no one was downstairs. He listened to the clip immediately. The audio was clearer than before. There were multiple overlapping sounds. Not voices exactly, but something close. It sounded like people shifting weight, like quiet movement in a room where no one spoke. The sound ended abruptly when the prayer concluded. Nathan began saving the recordings separately. Each clip was labeled and archived. The pattern repeated without variation. By the end of the month, he could predict when the basement would record sound. If prayer was scheduled, the sensors would activate. If it was canceled, the basement remained silent. The recordings did not explain themselves. They only confirmed one thing. Something in the basement responded to prayer, and it only did so when the prayers were happening. Nathan expanded the review beyond the audio clips themselves. He pulled full system diagnostics, including sensitivity thresholds, calibration logs, and background noise baselines. Nothing indicated drift or malfunction. The sensors were operating exactly as configured. To rule out coincidence, Nathan compared recordings from different services: morning prayer, evening prayer, holiday vigils. Each produced basement audio within minutes of the first spoken prayer. The delay was consistent, usually less than 5 minutes. He overlaid the audio timestamps with the sanctuary microphone feed. The sounds below did not mirror the sounds above. There was no matching cadence, no echo, no delayed repetition. Whatever was being recorded in the basement was not a copy of what happened upstairs. Nathan invited a sound engineer from a nearby university to review the files. The engineer analyzed frequency ranges and waveform patterns. He confirmed the sounds were not structural resonance. They fell within ranges typical of human movement. Footsteps were suggested again. But the timing was wrong. The spacing between sounds did not match walking patterns. There were pauses, then clusters, then silence. Breathing was harder to dismiss. Several clips showed a steady inhale and exhale pattern. It was too slow for exertion, too regular for random noise. The engineer described it as resting respiration. Nathan checked the basement physically during services. He entered quietly and stood still. The air was cool and unmoving. Pipes were inactive. No animals were present. While he stood there, his phone alerted him. A new audio clip had been recorded. The timestamp matched the moment he was in the basement. He listened to it while standing in the room. The sound matched what he was hearing. Soft movement, subtle shifting. As if someone else were present, Nathan called out. His voice echoed faintly. The sensors did not trigger. Only the quiet sounds did. He reviewed security footage next. Cameras covered every basement access point. No doors opened. No lights turned on. The footage showed empty rooms. Church staff were interviewed. None admitted entering the basement during prayer. Most avoided it entirely. Several mentioned feeling uncomfortable near the stairwell at night. One volunteer recalled hearing something once. She said it sounded like people gathering below. She assumed it was a meeting she hadn't been told about. When she checked later, the basement was empty. Nathan attempted controlled tests. Recorded prayer played through speakers in the sanctuary. No basement audio followed. Live prayer produced sound. Recorded prayer did not. Different speakers were tested. Different languages, different group sizes. The result was the same. When people prayed together, the basement recorded sound. When they did not, it stayed silent. Nathan documented everything carefully. Each test removed another explanation. No mechanical source fit the data. No human access explained the recordings. By early summer, the church leadership was informed. The reaction was cautious. No one suggested anything supernatural. They focused on liability and safety. The basement was checked again for hidden spaces. Old crawlways were sealed. Walls were inspected. Nothing changed. Despite the precautions, the recordings continued. They followed the prayer schedule with precision. They never appeared outside it. Nathan stopped trying to explain what the sounds were. Instead, he focused on what they were not. They were not random. They were not structural. They were not coming from above. Something in the basement responded to prayer, and it behaved as if it expected it. By late summer, church leadership made a decision. The audio monitoring system would be shut down. Officially, it was to reduce unnecessary concern. Unofficially, no one wanted to keep listening. Nathan archived every recording before the shutdown. Dates, times, and service types were labeled carefully. The dataset showed a perfect correlation with prayer hours. No other activity produced sound. The system was powered down on a weekday afternoon. That evening, a prayer service was held as usual. There were no recordings. The basement was silent, at least on record. For several weeks, nothing changed. Services continued. The basement remained unused. No one reported hearing anything. Then, during a routine maintenance visit, Nathan noticed something. One of the passive sensors had not been fully disconnected. It no longer transmitted data, but it still stored short clips internally. Out of caution, Nathan retrieved it and downloaded the memory. There were only 3 files. All were recorded during prayer hours. The final file was different. It was longer, nearly 10 minutes. Nathan listened to it alone. The sound began the same way. Soft movement, low breathing. Then it changed. A single clear exhale was followed by a sound he recognized. It was not speech. It was not mechanical. It was the sound of many people settling into stillness. Near the end of the recording, there was a brief pause. Then a soft sound like a floorboard shifting. After that, nothing. Nathan checked the timestamp. It matched the moment the prayer service above had ended. The basement sound stopped at the same second. Nathan returned the sensor without telling anyone. The basement remained unused. No new monitoring was installed. Years later, the church underwent renovations. The basement was partially finished. Walls were added. New floors were laid. Construction crews reported nothing unusual. No hidden rooms were found. No artifacts were uncovered. The archived recordings remain in a private storage drive. They have not been analyzed again. No one requested them. The church still holds prayer services. People gather, speak softly, and leave. Below them, the basement is quiet. Whatever responded to prayer no longer records itself. But for a time, it did. And it did so with perfect attention to the schedule above. This rural bus stop appears only in emergency records. Emergency dispatch logs referenced a rural bus stop that did not exist on any official map. No transit authority recognized the location. Yet multiple emergency calls were routed there over several years. In the winter of 2016, a regional emergency data analyst named Mara Ellison was assigned to audit inconsistencies in rural response times. She was 40 years old and worked for a state-level emergency coordination office. Her task was administrative, focused on improving GPS accuracy and call routing efficiency in remote areas. During the audit, Mara noticed a recurring location tag in the system. It appeared as a bus stop identifier tied to medical and accident calls. The name was generic, listed only as County Route 117, northbound stop. No street address accompanied it. At first, Mara assumed it was outdated data. Rural bus routes changed frequently, and legacy entries were common. But when she cross-referenced the identifier with the state transit database, nothing matched. There was no active or retired stop by that name. She expanded the search. The stop did not appear in county transportation records. It was missing from GIS mapping layers. Even archived route schedules showed no reference. What stood out was where it did appear. Every instance of the stop was linked to an emergency. Medical calls, injury reports, and once, a missing person alert. No routine service logs referenced it. Only emergencies did. The earliest record dated back to 2009. A call reporting a collapsed passenger waiting for a bus. Paramedics were dispatched using the stop identifier. The patient was transported successfully. No follow-up notes mentioned confusion about the location. Another case involved a traffic collision. The caller said the crash occurred by the bus stop on 117. Responders arrived without delay. The stop was logged again, then never referenced outside the incident. Mara mapped the coordinates pulled from the emergency system. They clustered along a rural highway stretch running through farmland and wooded areas. There were no shelters, signs, or pullouts recorded there. Satellite imagery showed only road, shoulder, and drainage. She contacted the Regional Transit Authority. They confirmed no buses currently stopped along that section. They also stated no historical stops had ever been approved there. If passengers boarded informally, it was undocumented. Mara reviewed dispatcher notes. In multiple calls, operators asked callers to confirm landmarks. Callers consistently said the same thing. They were at the bus stop, and responders seemed to understand. None of the reports described the stop in detail. No bench, no sign, no shelter. It was treated as self-evident, as if everyone involved assumed it was real. Mara listened to recorded emergency calls. The callers sounded stressed but coherent. They did not question the location. They used it naturally, like a known reference point. One recording stood out. A caller reported severe chest pain late at night. When asked for location, they hesitated briefly. Then they said the bus stop name clearly. The dispatcher did not question it. Mara checked response times. They were normal. Units arrived quickly and without rerouting. No one reported difficulty finding the scene. By the end of the first review, Mara faced a contradiction. A bus stop repeatedly guided emergency responders. It functioned as a location, but outside emergency records, it did not exist at all. And every time it appeared, someone needed help. Mara escalated the anomaly to her supervisor, expecting it to be dismissed as a database artifact. Instead, she was asked to document it more thoroughly. If emergency resources were being routed using an unverified landmark, it needed explanation. She pulled every incident tied to the bus stop identifier. There were 27 cases spanning 7 years. All of them involved emergencies. There were no routine welfare checks, no false alarms, no test calls. A pattern began to emerge. Nearly every call occurred between dusk and early morning. Most involved people who were alone. Several callers mentioned waiting. One medical call described an elderly man who said he had been waiting for the last bus. Transit records confirmed no bus had run that route in over a decade. The man was found disoriented but alive. He never clarified why he expected a bus. Another case involved a teenager reporting an injured friend. The caller said they had been dropped off at the stop. When asked who dropped them off, the line went quiet for several seconds. Then the caller repeated the stop name and nothing else. Mara reviewed GPS traces from responding units. Vehicles approached the location confidently. They did not slow down or search. They stopped at nearly the same stretch of road every time. Field notes from responders were minimal. Most reports focused on patient care, but a few included vague remarks. Patient located roadside. No visible shelter. Caller waiting near marker. There was no marker listed in any inventory. Mara contacted several first responders who had worked those calls. Most did not remember anything unusual. A few recalled the location only after being prompted. They described it as obvious or where people wait. One paramedic paused before answering. He said he remembered the stop because it felt wrong. There was no sign or bench, just a widening in the shoulder and a patch of worn ground. He said it looked like people stood there often. Mara requested traffic camera footage from the highway department. Cameras covered parts of Route 117. During the timestamps of several calls, the footage showed responders arriving. In the background, the shoulder appeared empty before they stopped. No person was visible until responders exited their vehicles. In one clip, a figure appeared only after headlights washed over the area. The person was standing exactly where responders stopped. No movement showed them arriving. Mara reviewed the emergency call audio again. She noticed something subtle. In several calls, dispatchers asked how long the caller had been waiting. The answers varied, but shared a theme. Longer than expected, longer than planned. One caller said, "I've been here since it got dark." Another said, "I thought the bus would come eventually." 10 great. Doing. 10 great. No one questioned why. Mara attempted to visit the location herself during daylight. She drove Route 117 slowly. There was no sign, no shelter, no pullout. Only a narrow shoulder and uneven grass. She stopped where the GPS coordinates clustered. The ground showed faint wear, foot traffic patterns that did not match farm activity. No trash, no benchmarks, nothing official. At night, she returned with permission. Headlights illuminated the shoulder. From a distance, it looked like a place someone might wait. Up close, there was nothing there. She stood on the shoulder briefly. Cars passed without slowing. There was no sound except wind and road noise. No indication anyone should stop. Yet emergency systems treated it as a valid location. Dispatchers accepted it. Responders found it. Patients were always there. Mara updated her report with a conclusion she did not like. The bus stop functioned operationally. It did not exist administratively. And it only appeared when someone needed emergency help. After completing the report, Mara submitted a recommendation to remove the bus stop identifier from the emergency system. Her reasoning was straightforward. Unverified landmarks created liability. If the stop was not real, it should not be used. The recommendation was denied. Supervisors cited response efficiency. Units consistently arrived without delay. No incidents were mishandled. From a performance standpoint, the identifier worked. Instead of removal, the stop was flagged as emergency reference only. No attempt was made to formalize it. No sign was installed. No map was updated. Mara continued to monitor the data quietly. Over the next 2 years, 7 more emergencies were logged at the same location. The pattern did not change. The time window remained nighttime. The callers were alone. They were waiting. One incident stood out. A caller reported a woman standing in the road near the stop. The caller was driving past and did not stop. By the time responders arrived, no one was there. The call was closed as unfounded. Another involved a man found unconscious with no identification. He recovered but refused to explain why he was at that location. He only said he was trying to get home. Mara requested removal again after a system upgrade. The answer remained no. The stop had become embedded in dispatch workflows. Removing it risked confusion. Eventually, Mara was reassigned. The audit was closed. The bus stop identifier remained. Years later, during a routine data cleanup, the identifier disappeared. No change request documented its removal. It simply stopped appearing in new records. Emergency calls along Route 117 continued. None referenced a bus stop anymore. Responders still arrived at roughly the same area when guided by GPS coordinates. They just used mile markers instead. Mara noticed the absence during a later review. She searched historical data, the old records remained. The identifier did not. No one reported its removal. No one asked about it. The system behaved as if it had never existed. The shoulder of Route 117 remains unchanged. No sign stands there. No bench marks the spot. Traffic moves past without pause. Yet for years, people went there when they needed help. They waited for something that was not scheduled to arrive. Emergency systems recognized the place. Maps did not. The bus stop appeared only when someone was in trouble. And once it stopped being used, it vanished completely, leaving behind only the records that say it was there. This motel room recorded breathing after checkout. The incident began with an audio file time-stamped minutes after a motel room was officially marked vacant. What the recording captured sounded like slow breathing in a room no one had entered again. In the late fall of 2018, a maintenance supervisor named Lauren Kessick arrived early for a routine shift. He was 42 years old and had spent nearly 20 years working maintenance jobs in small roadside motels. The property sat along a divided highway, far enough from town to feel forgotten, yet busy enough to stay profitable. Lauren planned to finish minor repairs before noon, then prepare for an incoming storm system. Room 114 was first on his list. The front desk system showed the guest had checked out at 6:23 that morning. It was a one-night stay, paid in cash, with no complaints or service requests logged. Housekeeping had already cleared the room and marked it ready for inspection. Lauren unlocked the door and stepped inside, immediately noticing the air felt heavier than usual. The lights came on clean and bright, revealing a room that looked properly turned over. The bed was stripped, towels stacked neatly, trash removed, and surfaces wiped down thoroughly. Nothing appeared disturbed, missing, or out of place. He moved through the room methodically, testing outlets and checking fixtures as he always did. When he bent down near the nightstand to inspect a loose outlet cover, his radio emitted a brief burst of static. The interference was common in that wing of the building, so he ignored it at first. Then another sound followed, quieter but far more unsettling. It sounded like breathing, slow, steady, and deliberate, as if someone were standing close by and exhaling calmly. Lauren straightened and listened, his eyes moving across the room instinctively. The sound seemed to come from near the bed, low and close to the floor. He checked the bathroom first, pulling the shower curtain aside and opening the cabinet beneath the sink. Everything inside was clean and empty. Next, he opened the closet, which held only hangers and a spare blanket sealed in plastic. The breathing continued without pause, unchanged in rhythm or volume. Loren felt his chest tighten as he realized the sound was not moving. It was not reacting to him, not growing louder or softer. It simply continued, steady and patient. He backed toward the door, keeping his eyes on the center of the room. Once in the hallway, he pulled the door shut firmly. The breathing stopped immediately. He waited several seconds, then placed his ear near the door. There was nothing. Not even ambient noise. Lauren reopened the door slowly. The room was silent. He stood there for a moment, then stepped inside again. No sound returned. He locked the door and went straight to the front desk. The morning clerk on duty was Brea Mott, a night auditor finishing her shift. She was 35 and known for staying calm under pressure. Loren described what he heard, choosing his words carefully to avoid sounding alarmed. Brea listened, then suggested it might have been ventilation noise or radio feedback. Still, she followed protocol and logged the report as an unexplained auditory disturbance. She marked the room for temporary hold until management could review it. Neither of them expected the report to matter much after that moment. Later that morning, the housekeeping supervisor entered room 114 as part of her routine checks. She exited less than 2 minutes later, visibly shaken. She told Brea she heard breathing near the bed after the door closed behind her. She refused to go back inside. By midday, management decided to pull electronic records related to the room. The motel used a simple security system that archived hallway audio overnight. There were no cameras inside rooms, but a microphone covered the corridor outside room 114. Lauren assisted as they located the correct timestamp. The recording began with distant footsteps and a door closing somewhere down the hall. At 6:24, the corridor was empty and quiet. Then a low sound emerged, faint but rhythmic. It rose and fell at regular intervals, slow and measured. The sound continued for several minutes. No doors opened, and no footsteps approached the room during that time. The breathing stopped abruptly, leaving only background hum. The room had been empty the entire time. Management closed room 114 for the rest of the day and instructed staff not to enter it alone. The decision was framed as caution, not fear, but the mood in the office shifted noticeably. Brea printed the incident log and attached the hallway audio file for review. By early afternoon, the regional office had been notified. The following morning, an investigator named Callan Rourke arrived at the property. He was 48 and previously worked as an insurance field adjuster for commercial properties. Callan approached situations methodically and without commentary, which put staff slightly at ease. His task was to determine whether the incident posed liability or safety concerns. Callan began by interviewing Loren in the maintenance office. Loren repeated his account carefully, sticking to what he heard and what he did afterward. Callan asked about building age, prior renovations, and known mechanical issues. Lauren explained that the motel had been remodeled once, several years earlier, without major structural changes. Next, Callan spoke with Brea and the housekeeping supervisor separately. Their descriptions matched closely, especially regarding the location and rhythm of the sound. Neither described panic, only certainty that the breathing was real and nearby. Callan made note of the consistency. He then reviewed the hallway audio using professional headphones. The breathing was faint but unmistakable. It followed a natural inhale and exhale pattern, slightly uneven, almost human. There was no accompanying movement, footsteps, or fabric noise. Callan requested guest records for room 114 covering the past year. The data showed a pattern of short stays, often paid in cash, with minimal guest interaction. 3 internal notes stood out among otherwise routine logs. Each referenced unusual noise complaints or early departures with no explanation. One note mentioned a guest who requested a room change after claiming someone was breathing behind the headboard. Another referenced a guest who left before sunrise without checking out in person. At the time, both incidents were dismissed as stress or misunderstanding. Seeing them together changed how they were viewed. Callan expanded the search to older archived records. With Loren's help, he accessed maintenance logs dating back before the renovation. One report described sealing an unused service crawl space beneath several rooms. The crawl space had once connected to an outdated heating system. Blueprints confirmed that room 114 sat directly above the sealed area. According to records, the space was supposed to be empty and inaccessible. Callan requested permission to inspect the seal, citing due diligence. Management agreed, though reluctantly. Access to the crawl space was located behind a locked utility panel. It took several hours to cut through reinforced foam and layered insulation. When the panel was removed, stale air rushed out, undisturbed and dry. There were no signs of recent entry. Inside, the crawl space was narrow and lined with concrete channels. Sound traveled clearly through the space, echoing softly even at low volume. A technician tested this by speaking quietly, and the words carried upward with ease. This explained how sound could move, but not its source. As they searched further inside, Callan noticed a rusted metal shelf bolted to the wall. Resting on it was an old cassette recorder, coated in dust. It was unplugged and showed no signs of recent use. A tape sat inside, labeled only with a faded handwritten date. The date corresponded to a year when the motel operated under a different name. The recorder should not have functioned, and yet it felt deliberately placed. Callan removed it carefully and sealed it in an evidence bag. At that point, the investigation took a different direction. The cassette recorder was taken to a quiet office near the lobby for closer inspection. Callan examined it without powering it on, noting the worn buttons and cracked plastic casing. There was no battery inside and no internal power source visible. Despite that, the tape inside was intact and threaded properly. A portable player was brought in from storage. When the tape was inserted and played, the sound filled the room immediately. It was the same slow breathing heard on the hallway recording. The rhythm matched almost exactly, including slight pauses that felt involuntary. The recording had no clear beginning or end. It continued steadily, without speech, movement, or background noise. Callan stopped the tape after several minutes. No one in the room spoke right away. The handwritten date on the cassette was traced through archived property records. That year aligned with a documented medical emergency in room 114. A long-term guest had suffered a fatal episode overnight. Emergency responders noted interference on their radios while inside the room. There were no details about recording equipment in the report. However, maintenance logs from that period mentioned contractors working on heating controls. Those contractors were never identified by name. The assumption was that someone recorded the room for diagnostic reasons. What could not be explained was timing. The tape matched new audio captured years later. There was no trigger mechanism discovered in the crawl space. The recorder could not activate on its own. Callan concluded the investigation with a practical recommendation. Room 114 should remain closed permanently. The crawl space was resealed with additional insulation. All audio files were archived and classified as unresolved anomalies. The motel continues to operate without drawing attention. Guests are never assigned to that room. Staff rarely mention it, and when they do, the conversation stays brief. The breathing was never heard again after the room was sealed. The recordings remain stored with routine incident logs. They are unchanged and unedited. They document sound in a space that was officially empty. No explanation has ever fully accounted for that. This hospital wing activated with no staff inside. Access logs showed lights, monitors, and alarms activating inside a hospital wing officially closed and unstaffed. No badge entry, motion alert, or work order explained why the systems came online. In the winter of 2015, a facilities coordinator named Bram Knoll was called in before dawn to a regional hospital. He was 44 years old and handled building systems during nights and weekends. The hospital served several rural towns and operated quietly during overnight hours. Bram's goal that morning was simple: confirm whether the alert was a system fault and restore normal status. The alert originated from the East Wing. That wing had been closed for more than a year due to budget cuts and planned renovation. Patient rooms were empty, equipment removed, and access restricted to maintenance only. Power was limited to minimal circuits designed to prevent deterioration, not active use. At 4:12 a.m., the central control system logged unexpected activity. Lights activated in multiple patient rooms. Several bedside monitors powered on and began self-checks. A nurse call alarm triggered briefly, then stopped. The system flagged the event as abnormal and escalated it automatically. Bram received the notification on his phone while at home. Within 20 minutes, he arrived at the hospital. Security met him in the lobby and confirmed no overnight staff had accessed the East Wing. Camera feeds showed empty corridors. No doors opened and no movement was detected. Badge access logs were clean. According to every system, no one had been inside. Bram entered the control room and pulled up the detailed timeline. The activations followed a clear sequence. Room lights came on first, then monitors, then the nurse call system. That order matched a standard startup, not a random surge. He checked maintenance schedules and contractor logs. No inspections or testing were planned. No vendors were signed in. The wing was supposed to remain dormant until further notice. Bram and a security officer proceeded to the East Wing together. The corridor lights were on, illuminating unused nurses, stations, and empty halls. The air smelled clean and still, without signs of recent disturbance. Everything looked untouched. They walked past room after room with powered equipment. Monitors glowed softly with idle screens. One infusion pump displayed a startup message before timing out. Nothing appeared broken or tampered with. Bram checked wall panels and breaker boxes. All switches were set to off. Emergency circuits showed normal readings. There was no evidence of power fluctuation or failure. The nurse call system log showed a single activation. It originated from a patient room at the far end of the wing. The system recorded a call placed and canceled within 10 seconds. No staff device acknowledged it. They entered the listed room. The bed was stripped and pushed against the wall. A monitor above it showed a flat baseline waiting for input. The call button rested untouched on the rail. Bram inspected wiring behind the access panel. Connections were intact and coated with dust. Nothing suggested recent handling. The room appeared as it had for months. Back in the control room, Bram reviewed archived data. Two similar alerts appeared in the previous year. Both occurred between 4 and 5 a.m. Each time, systems activated briefly, then shut down on their own. Those earlier incidents were dismissed as software errors. No one had physically checked the wing then. Seeing the pattern now made Bram uneasy. The system was behaving consistently, not randomly. He escalated the issue to hospital administration. An internal review was scheduled for later that day. Until then, Bram was instructed to monitor the wing closely. The east wing remained lit, active, and empty. As dawn approached, the systems powered down without command. Lights shut off one by one. Monitors went dark. The wing returned to its dormant state. No explanation accompanied the shutdown. Nothing in the logs clarified why it had started. Bram saved the records and waited for answers. The building had followed instructions that no one could find. Later that morning, hospital administration convened an internal review in a small conference room off the main corridor. Bram presented the activation logs, emphasizing the orderly startup sequence and repeated timing pattern. Several department heads listened quietly, focusing on the nurse call activation at the far room. Security supervisors confirmed their footage again. No staff badge entries appeared, and no motion sensors were triggered during the event. Camera feeds showed empty hallways from every angle. According to security systems, the wing remained untouched. Information technology staff reviewed the building control software. They verified no remote access occurred and no automated tests were scheduled. System permissions showed no override commands. The software believed it had received legitimate internal signals. Clinical engineering inspected device records from the powered equipment. Monitors reported normal self-test cycles without error codes. Infusion pumps logged brief power on states, then standard shutdowns. Nothing indicated malfunction or external interference. Bram guided the team back into the east wing that afternoon. With daylight filtering through high windows, the space felt more ordinary. Dust lay undisturbed along baseboards and counters. No footprints or signs of entry were visible anywhere. They focused on the room tied to the nurse call alert. A technician removed the call button housing carefully. The wiring was intact, unfrayed, and properly terminated. There was no moisture or corrosion that could trigger false signals. Power engineers traced the circuit supplying that room. It shared a line with several adjacent rooms, yet only one logged an alert. Voltage readings stayed stable throughout testing. No spikes or drops were recorded overnight. Bram requested deeper archival research. Old maintenance reports were pulled from before the wing closure. Several documents referenced recurring alarms in that same room years earlier. Those alarms often occurred near early morning hours. An older facilities engineer was contacted by phone. He recalled frequent false nurse call alerts when the wing served intensive care patients. The issue was attributed to sensor sensitivity but never fully resolved. Eventually, the room was taken out of rotation. Records showed the wing closed shortly afterward for unrelated reasons. When power was reduced, the problematic room was never individually isolated. Minimal circuits still supplied it to preserve infrastructure. No one expected active signaling to resume. Administration debated possible explanations. Some suggested delayed capacitor discharge or residual signal loops. Others proposed software ghosts left from legacy configurations. None of the theories explained the clean startup sequence. To mitigate risk, the hospital approved additional isolation. Non-essential circuits were physically disconnected from the East Wing. Control access required dual authorization going forward. Security added manual seals to key electrical panels. Bram documented every change carefully. The modifications were signed off by engineering and administration. For weeks afterward, the wing remained quiet and dark. No alerts appeared and no systems activated. Staff gradually moved on from the incident. Other priorities took focus, and the East Wing faded from discussion. Still, Bram reviewed the logs each morning. The earlier activations remained precise and unexplained. Just before the end of winter, another alert appeared. It was brief and isolated to a single monitor in the same room. The device powered on, displayed a startup screen, then shut itself down. No other systems followed. By the time Bram arrived, the wing was silent again. Logs confirmed the activation lasted less than 30 seconds. Security footage showed no movement. The same room was involved once more. That incident ended further debate. The system was responding to something consistent. It behaved as if a presence briefly requested attention. No record showed who or what made that request. After the final activation, hospital administration chose not to pursue further testing. The decision was practical rather than confident. Each inspection had produced the same result: no faults, no access, no explanation. Continuing investigations risked reopening a wing that was no longer needed. Engineering staff finalized the isolation plan. The remaining maintenance circuits feeding the East Wing were permanently disconnected. Power routing was physically severed rather than controlled by software. The nurse call line from the problematic room was terminated at the panel. Bram supervised the work personally. He photographed each step and archived the documentation. Once finished, the wing was effectively inert. Nothing inside could activate without a full rebuild. For several months, no alerts appeared. Control logs showed complete silence from the East Wing. Security cameras continued to show empty corridors. The issue seemed resolved. During a routine annual audit, an external inspector reviewed past incident summaries. The East Wing activations stood out immediately. The inspector asked why the room number appeared repeatedly in unrelated logs. Bram explained the history as plainly as he could. The inspector requested older clinical records tied to that room. Those records showed a pattern from its time as an intensive care space. Patients assigned there experienced frequent nurse call activations without pressing the button. Staff had complained that the room seemed to signal on its own. At the time, the issue was blamed on aging sensors. Repairs were attempted but never fully successful. When budgets tightened, the room was closed first. Soon after, the entire wing followed. The inspector asked if any deaths had occurred in that room. Records showed several, consistent with intensive care use. One case stood out due to repeated alarm activations overnight. The patient died shortly before morning rounds. That detail was noted but not emphasized. No one suggested a connection openly. The audit concluded without recommendation. The East Wing remained closed and forgotten. Years passed, and hospital leadership changed. The building expanded in other directions. New wings opened with updated systems. The East Wing was never reopened. Bram eventually moved into a consulting role. He no longer handled daily alerts. Still, he kept copies of the original logs. They remained precise, orderly, and unanswered. Occasionally, during system training, the incident was mentioned. It was framed as an example of why physical isolation mattered. No one spoke about the nurse call timing. No one questioned the repeated 4 a.m. pattern. The East Wing still exists behind locked doors. It is dark, empty, and disconnected. Nothing inside has powered on since the final shutdown. At least, nothing that was logged. The records show systems activating exactly as designed. They show a wing responding to a request. They do not show who made it. They never did.